Welcome to this explainer on the standards and qualities of language testing and assessment. I'm Dr. Eris, and as an assessment lecturer, I usually start by shattering a very common, very stubborn illusion, the myth of the perfect test. It just doesn't exist. Not all tests are equally effective. And since assessment results drive massive real-world decisions, like student placement, university admissions, and even employment, we absolutely need defensible, quality assessments. Joining me to unpack all of this are two folks intimately familiar with these high stakes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maya. I'm a postgraduate TESOL student, and honestly, I am so ready to dig into the theoretical frameworks that make these assessments actually defensible.
Hey folks, I'm Sam. I'm an early career language teacher, and to be completely honest with you all, I'm currently stressing out big time over designing my first major midterm exam.
Well, Sam, you're definitely in the right place. Let's evaluate and refine that midterm design of yours by looking at the core theories of testing. Right, so to help Sam out, we're going to follow a quick visual syllabus today. 5 key areas. 1. Standards versus qualities. 2. Reliability and validity. 3. Authenticity versus practicality. 4. Fairness, impact, and ethics. And 5. Balancing priorities. All right, let's jump straight in. Section 1. Standards versus qualities. Before we look at a single test question on your midterm, Sam, we've got to establish some foundational vocabulary. In the assessment literature, standards are our desired criteria. They're the principles an assessment should meet. Think of them as the theoretical target, the ultimate dream. Qualities, on the other hand, represent reality. It's the actual degree to which an assessment achieves those theoretical standards in practice. So assessment quality isn't just one magic characteristic, it's a constant balancing act among multiple standards.
Okay, so if standards are the theoretical dream and qualities are the messy reality of what actually happens in my classroom, how on earth do we measure that gap?
We can actually answer that by looking at classical test theory, specifically this idea of the true score versus the error score. Sam, every single test grade a student gets is made up of 2 distinct parts. The true score is the part that is highly relevant to the target ability. It's what the student genuinely knows. But the error score? That represents measurement uncertainty. It's basically static blocking the radio signal.
Wait, hold on. So you're telling me that every single B+ or C- I've ever handed out inherently contains a margin of error?
Exactly, Sam. No assessment instrument is flawed. We can literally never eliminate the error score completely. But our job as test designers is to minimize it so that final grade is as close to the true score as statistically possible. Which perfectly segues into Section 2, reliability and validity. Now, we are getting to the 2 absolute heavy hitters in all of testing. The golden rule here is that consistency has to pair with meaningfulness. Reliability is all about the consistency and accuracy of those scores. Validity, meanwhile, is about the meaningful interpretation of those scores for their proposed uses. And Dr. Eris, if we really break down the frameworks, reliability splits into 4 specific types. First, internal consistency, like do all the items on Sam's midterm measure the same general construct? Then test-retest reliability. If a student took the exact same test tomorrow, would they get the same score? We also have parallel form reliability, which asks if 2 different versions of the midterm give the same results. And finally, inter-rater reliability, meaning if Sam and I both grade the exact same essay, do we give it the same score? Okay, got it. So if I grade my Tuesday grammar quiz the exact same rigid way every single time, it has high inter-rater reliability. But what if the quiz questions are so poorly worded that my students are failing because of bad reading comprehension, not bad grammar? Bingo, Sam. Hit the nail on the head. Your test would be reliably wrong. It lacks validity because it isn't actually measuring what you intended to measure. Man, thinking about my own classroom, I can see exactly where that error score comes from now. I definitely had a super noisy room during a listening test last week, so that's environment error. And my marking rubric for an essay was incredibly vague. That's a marking procedure error. I've also had students who were overly anxious, which is a student characteristic, or I've rushed through the instructions, which is an administration error.
Right. And even a poorly printed, super confusing test paper introduces error variants through the test items themselves. All 5 of these sources inject random and systematic error into your final grades, and that completely undermines your test reliability.
And to really visualize the impact of that error, we use standard deviation. In assessment statistics, standard deviation highlights the heterogeneity or homogeneity of your students' scores by showing the average distance of test scores from the mean.
Exactly. So if the standard deviation is massive, the scores are widely spread out, meaning there's a huge variance in the classroom. And that forces us to ask a really tough question. Is that variance due to a true difference in student ability, or are those pesky measurement errors we just talked about skewing the whole spread?
This naturally drags us deeper into validity. In modern assessment theory, there is a massive paradigm shift you need to know. You don't validate a test itself. You validate the interpretation of the scores. And we gather specific evidence to do this. Content evidence asks if the test covers the right syllabus material. Response process evidence checks if students are actually using the intended cognitive skills. Internal structure looks at how test items relate to each other. Relations with other variables compares your scores to other established measures. And consequential evidence, that looks at what actually happens in the real world because of this test.
Wow. Okay. So validity isn't just a box I check during design. It's this ongoing argument about how I'm using the results to make decisions about my students' futures.
Which brings us to Section 3, authenticity versus practicality. So, Dr. Aris, if validity is so absolutely crucial, how can I make a simple Tuesday speaking quiz perfectly resemble a real-world task? Like, shouldn't every test be as authentic as possible?
I mean, that's the dream, Sam. But can you actually afford the time? What about your school's budget or your own marking load? Real-world authenticity is amazing, but it just isn't always scalable for a single teacher managing a massive classroom.
Dr. Aris is absolutely right. This is the central trade-off of assessment design. Authenticity requires real-world resemblance and authentic texts. This is fantastic for validity because it reflects how language is actually used out in the wild. However, highly authentic tasks, like immersive one-on-one workplace role-plays, often score incredibly low on practicality. They demand massive amounts of time, cost, human resources, and specific technology.
Yeah, I see what you mean. There is literally no way I can interview 30 students individually for 20 minutes every single week. It's logistically impossible. I have to somehow balance that ideal authentic design with the practical resources I actually have.
Moving right along to Section 4, fairness, impact, and ethics. You know, stepping away from the logistics for a second, I'm thinking about the students themselves. Does every test taker have a truly equal opportunity to show what they can do? If I give a rigid, unaccommodated test to a student with a visual impairment, or if I use reading passages filled with heavy, localized cultural bias that only half the class understands, I'm totally unfairly disadvantaging them.
For sure. And when that kind of bias creeps in, Sam, it destroys both the fairness of your classroom and the trustworthiness of your grades. True fairness demands inclusivity, accessibility, and equitable interpretation for every single diverse learner.
And the real-world ripple effect of those grades is what we call the washback effect. A high-stakes test fundamentally influences how students study, how teachers teach, and eventually how society behaves. Positive washback happens when a well-designed communication test forces students to actively practice speaking with each other. Negative washback happens when a high-stakes multiple-choice test forces teachers to abandon actual conversation practice just to drill isolated grammar rules to beat the test.
That is both terrifying and illuminating. My midterm won't just evaluate them. It's going to fundamentally shape my students' educational behavior and exactly how I teach my own curriculum.
This is precisely why the International Language Testing Association provides a strict code of ethics. As educators, we have an absolute ethical responsibility to never abuse test results. This framework requires transparency about how we grade, strict confidentiality, and professional accountability. Assessment results should never, ever be misused to unfairly penalize a student or misrepresent their actual real-world abilities. And that brings us to our final section, number 5, balancing priorities. Looking at all these theoretical frameworks together, I'm realizing that my midterm design is basically just one giant, unending negotiation. An incredibly authentic, immersive test might be totally impractical for me to run on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Right. And on the flip side, the most practical test, like a 10-minute machine-graded multiple-choice quiz, might not be fair or valid if it doesn't actually measure the communicative skills your syllabus promised to teach.
Exactly, you two. Reliability and validity have to work together as a team. A professional educator must constantly weigh these 7 criteria against each other to find that defensible sweet spot for their specific context. So, I'll leave everyone with this final, provocative thought. When you look at the tests you design or the assessments you take, are they truly balancing these quality standards? Or have you fallen into the trap of sacrificing meaningful validity just to make the marking practical?
Understanding these theoretical frameworks is the first vital step toward refining our educational practice and making truly defensible decisions. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.